That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet! Be still!" Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
May I speak in the name of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Many of us find anger a difficult emotion to express and a difficult emotion to hold and to care for when we encounter it in others. But anger is there in the Bible and in our lives. I wish I'd been there to say, "Don't you care that we are about to die?" This really resonates with me. What is Jesus doing? Lying comfortable and sleeping whilst his disciples are coping with a storm that's raging around them. Has he no care for their safety, for their anxiety and their fear? How many times do we find ourselves in a storm of personal circumstances, fears for ourselves and our loved ones, and fears and anxieties for those in our world? We feel anger on behalf of people throughout the world whose livelihoods and homes are jeopardized, for the people who are compromised in their health and who have no medical support or vaccines, and so have to go about their lives in vulnerability. The storm is raging, but Jesus is asleep. And how angry are we at his seeming lack of concern and protection? I recall a resource I often used for training people in bereavement care. It used sculptures to represent the different emotions that a person might experience when they encounter loss. One of them was anger. That was the emotion, and that sculpture was of a head with a fierce-looking face. When we turned the sculpture around, the head was backless, and the sculptor explained that this was to represent the descriptions we have for those who are angry. Things like, she's off her head, she's losing it, he's blown his top. All very negative, aren't they? Anger is not something we find easy in ourselves or in others. And yet we have good models and examples in the Bible which is full of human understanding. For instance, the psalmist cries out, "How long? And why, O Lord?" And Jesus himself exhibits anger when faced with double-dealing, deception, and injustice. So we see Jesus asleep in the midst of the storm. What is that all about? Well, perhaps his sleep is not the sleep of denial or carelessness, and certainly not of resignation. Perhaps this is the sleep of preparation. I recall a few years ago there was a solar eclipse due to be at its height in the middle of the day, and that day happened to be a day that I had a day off work. and I walked into Upton Park and stood on the boardwalk there at about the time that the sun was forecast to be blocked from our view. It turned out to be a rather cloudy day, so the effects of the solar eclipse weren't quite as dramatic as hoped for. Even so, the sky darkened and the streetlights of Poole that were visible from my viewpoint all went on automatically. But the most memorable and dramatic change was the silence. There wasn't a cheep, a trill, or a single note of birdsong to be heard. All went still and all went completely silent. It's quite eerie. The wildlife, especially the bird life, was only too aware of the lack of sunlight and the fact that it was more than just cloud cover. The eclipse signalled some rupture in the north for that time of day and that time of year. And the bird life was attuned to it and only too aware of it. Jesus wakes up and stills the storm. His sleep had been quite different from the sleep he'd been accused of, which was the sleep of resignation and uninvolvement. His was actually the sleep of at-one-ment with nature and the sleep of preparedness and readiness. Jesus stands up and says to the wind, "Be quiet," and to the waves, "Be still." And the disciples are fearful, not for their lives as they had been in the midst of the storm, when they were being battered by the wind and the waves, but fearful in the sense of being awe-filled, that the man they called their teacher was so at one with nature that he sensed the storm approaching, that he stilled himself, and that he became silent, just as the bird life had been stilled and silent through the eclipse those years ago. And then Jesus rested and climbed, turned to the elements, and stilled them. Finally, I invite you to question those words, "Be quiet, be still." Do you think Jesus raised his voice and shouted over the wind and waves to dominate them and subdue them? I like to think not. I imagine from that state of complete rest and repose that he addressed the weavings of nature that he himself had fashioned into the creation that we know and love. Those elements of nature that are both splendid and sometimes scary. He wouldn't have had to overpower them. He simply reined them in. Be quiet. Be still. Enough. A quote attributed to St. Francis de Sales, who was known as the gentleman saint, goes like this: "Nothing so strong as gentleness, nothing so gentle as real strength." In this gospel story, we see the gentle power of Jesus that overcomes the storm. Through an at-oneness with his creation, Jesus speaks words to still and subdue, bringing his disciples to safety, demonstrating his readiness in every situation of storm and unrest to step in and to bring peace. Perhaps Jesus is even now asleep, unnoticed in your life and in mine, in the lives of those who are angry and the lives of those who are beaten down and tired, those whose anger has dulled into apathy. And so perhaps the challenge of this story is for each one of us to lie with Jesus in quietness and contemplation, to be made ready and equipped to stand with Jesus in the prow of our lives' boat, in the prow of our world's boat, and to say, "Be quiet, be still," gently averting the danger of being tipped out of our boat of faith, and so be brought safely to land on the shore in trust and awesome love for our Saviour. Amen.